Hi guys, welcome again. In today's video, we will create a REST API with Lambda integration. So, the agenda for today's video would be we would create a Lambda function for the backend of our API. Then we will create REST API, create resources and methods for the REST API, add Lambda integration, deploy the API to new stage, and we will test the API. So let us go straight to the AWS console to see our demo. So I am in my AWS console now. Let us go to the Lambda service. Let us create a new function. Name it anything, say backend, API backend. And create function. Lambda function creation takes some time because it also creates a role with the function which allows the Lambda function to write to the CloudWatch logs events. So now our Lambda function is created. Let us now go to API gateway. So in API gateway, today we are going to create a REST API. So click on build. Now there are four options to create the API. First one is create a new API, which creates a new REST API. And then there is an option to clone existing API. Create a copy of an API in this AWS account if you already have. Then we can also import an existing API through OpenAPI definition like Swagger or any other OpenAPI specification. And there are also example APIs available. So this is a Swagger file for example API, but we are not going to use it. We are going to create a new API. So now here we see API endpoint types. We have three type of API endpoints: regional, edge optimized, and private. The regional endpoints are we will create regional API with regional endpoint. In regional endpoints, requests are routed through an API gateway endpoint within a specific AWS region, like the region in which we are creating the API. Typically, this regional endpoint is used when your API's primary users are located in a specific region, reducing data transfer costs compared to other endpoint types. Now, second one here is edge optimized. In edge optimized API, requests are routed through CloudFront, which are globally distributed edge locations, and these are suitable for scenarios where low latency access is important. Third type is private. This allows you to expose your API to resources within your VPC instead of the public internet. It is useful for internal APIs or when you want to control access to your API within your private network. So today we are going to create regional API. Click on create API. Name cannot be empty. My first REST API. So create the API. So now our API is created. Now after creating the API, we need to create a resource. So if you go here in the APIs, we can see our first API is created. But we need to create a resource for this API. So what is a resource? A resource is a fundamental building block that represents a business logic unit within your API. Resources define the entities or objects that your API exposes, and they help you organize and structure the API's URI space. Each resource can have associated methods that define the operations that can be performed on the resource. So resource is like a fundamental building block, or it represents a business logic unit. For example, if you want to fetch all the users from your API, then you can create a resource like slash get users. We create the resource, and inside the resource then you need to create HTTP method. Each resource can have associated methods. We need to create methods inside the resource, and it can be more or one or more HTTP methods associated with it, such as get, post, put, delete, etc. The methods define the operations that can be performed on the resource. So now we are going to create a method for this resource. So we can select the method according to our requirement. So let us select get. Now here we have different integration types. First one is Lambda function. Integrate your API with Lambda function. So in this demo we are going to integrate this API with our Lambda function. When this API will be called, the Lambda when we call this API, Lambda will be called in the backend. And then we have HTTP if you want to integrate with an existing HTTP endpoint. Or you can also generate a response based on API gateway mappings and transformations. Or you can integrate with other AWS services as well, like there are a lot of AWS services with which you can integrate your API. And then we have VPC link. Integrate with a resource that is not accessible over the public internet. So we are in this demo we are going to select Lambda function. So select the Lambda function. We had created our Lambda function in EUS2 same region. So select this API backend. Create method. Successfully created resource and this method. Now our method is created. Next step is we need to deploy this API. So when we deploy the API, we need to select a stage. So right now we don't have any stage, so we will create a stage, new stage. Let us name it dev. So what is a stage? A stage is a named reference to an API deployment. We can have different stages like dev, prod, test. Stages are used to manage different versions or configurations of your API, which allows you to deploy and test changes without affecting the other environment. For example, we have a dev stage and a test and a production stage. You want to do some changes in the dev stage without deploying it to production, so you can create a stage named dev, and each stage has its own unique URL. And deploying to a stage means making the specified changes live and accessible through that stage's URL. So now we will deploy this stage, deploy the API. So now you can see, if you go here in the stages, we have this dev stage now, and inside the dev stage we have this API get users with get method, and this is the invoke URL. So now we can test our API through this URL / get users is the resource. So we can see we got a response from our backend Lambda, hello from Lambda. You can also use this API now anywhere, like in your code. You can use this API to call the backend Lambda function, or if you want to test, you can test it through any tool like Postman. For example, let us see it in Postman. So in Postman we can add this request with get users. It returned us the value response from the backend Lambda function. So in this video we saw how to create API gateway REST API with Lambda integration. In the next videos we will go deeper into other aspects of API gateway. If you like the video, please hit the like button, leave your comments or suggestions, and if you have not already subscribed, please consider subscribing to the channel. Thank you.